The police came to our door. They said my daughter-in-law's car was intercepted at the airport, and she was detained. I collapsed, feigning horror. The truth about Vanessa Collins would come out today, and I had waited 3 months for this moment. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. The 2 officers stood in my living room, their faces professionally neutral. Detective Raymond Price, a tall man with gray temples and tired eyes, held a folder thick with papers. His partner, a younger woman named Detective Solis, watched me carefully as I sat down on my couch and covered my face with my hands. "Mrs. Collins, I understand this is a shock," Detective Price said, "but we need you to look at some documents. They were found in your daughter-in-law's possession at Sky Harbor International. She was attempting to board a flight to Panama City." I kept my hands over my face for a moment longer, composing myself. When I looked up, I made sure my eyes were wet with tears I'd learned to summon on command. "I don't understand," I said. "Vanessa was supposed to be at a conference in San Diego. She said she was presenting a paper. There is no conference, ma'am, and we found these in her carry-on." Detective Price opened the folder and spread several documents across my coffee table: bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, and there, at the bottom, the document I'd been waiting to see in official hands for weeks. A withdrawal authorization for $485,000 from my son Marcus's life insurance settlement, with my signature at the bottom. Except, I had never signed it. I stared at the signature, and despite everything, despite the rehearsals and the careful planning, I felt a laugh building in my chest. It started small, just a tremor in my shoulders. Then it grew, bubbling up through my throat until it burst out of me in a sound that made both detectives take a step back. I laughed until tears streamed down my cheeks, real tears this time, but not from grief. "Mrs. Collins?" Detective Solis moved closer, her hand hovering near my arm. "Are you all right?" "I'm sorry," I gasped, wiping my eyes. "I'm sorry. It's just..." I pointed at the signature on the withdrawal form. "That's not my handwriting. It's not even close. The woman has been forging my name on documents for months, and she can't even do it right." The detectives exchanged glances. "You're saying this signature is forged?" Price asked. "Detective, I'm 62 years old. I've been signing my name the same way since I learned cursive in Mrs. Patterson's 3rd grade class at Roosevelt Elementary. My capital D has a loop that goes below the line. My B in Collins has a little tail. I tapped the paper with my finger. Looks like someone traced over a photocopy with a shaky hand." I wasn't exaggerating. The signature on the document was a clumsy imitation at best. Vanessa had always been arrogant. She thought she was smarter than everyone around her, but she'd never paid attention to details. "Can you provide a sample of your actual signature for comparison?" Solis asked. "I can do better than that." I stood up, my legs steady now. The performance of the grieving, shocked mother-in-law dropped like a coat I no longer needed. "I have the original document. The real one that Vanessa submitted to the insurance company 6 weeks ago before they caught the discrepancy and flagged it. I've been keeping it in my safe deposit box." Both detectives stared at me. "You knew about this?" Price asked slowly. "I suspected. I've suspected since 2 days after my son's funeral, when Vanessa asked me to sign a power of attorney so she could handle Marcus's affairs more efficiently. She was so helpful. So considerate." I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. "She brought me tea while I cried. She organized the memorial service. And then she started asking about the life insurance." I walked to the antique desk by the window, the desk my husband Robert had bought me for our 20th anniversary. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a manila folder. When the insurance company called me 3 weeks ago saying there was a problem with my signature on the withdrawal form, I asked them to send me a copy. I compared it to every document I'd actually signed during the settlement process. The forgery was obvious. I handed the folder to Detective Price. "I filed a fraud alert with the bank that same day. Told them not to release any funds from Marcus's accounts without my physical presence and verbal confirmation." Price flipped through the documents. His eyebrows rose as he compared signatures. "Mrs. Collins, Why didn't you report this to the police immediately? Because I wanted to see how far she'd go. I sat back down, feeling 20 years older than I had that morning. I wanted to know if my daughter-in-law was just a thief, or if she was something worse. I looked at the detective, at his professional skepticism, and wondered if he would believe me. If anyone would believe me. My son Marcus died 3 months ago in a single-car accident on Route 87. His car went off the road at 2 a.m., rolled down an embankment, and caught fire. The investigation concluded he fell asleep at the wheel. I paused. Marcus never drove at night if he could help it. He had night blindness from an eye surgery he'd had as a teenager, and he certainly never drove that stretch of road after dark. It's in the opposite direction from our house, from his office, from everywhere he had reason to be. Detective Solis had pulled out a notepad and was writing rapidly. "You think his death wasn't an accident," she said. "I think my daughter-in-law has been having an affair for at least 2 years. I think she was planning to leave my son, and then she found out about the life insurance policy worth $500,000. I think she decided it was easier to become a widow than a divorcee." The words hung in the air, ugly and raw. Price closed the folder. "Those are serious allegations, Mrs. Collins." "I know they are. That's why I've been gathering evidence instead of running to the police with accusations I couldn't prove." I met his eyes. "Now she's been caught trying to flee the country with nearly $500,000 she stole by forging my signature. I'd say the allegations are looking a little more credible." My hands were trembling. I clasped them together in my lap, pressing hard to stop the shaking. For 3 months I had carried this weight alone. For 3 months I had smiled at Vanessa across dinner tables, accepted her condolences, watched her parade through my son's house taking inventory of everything she planned to sell. For 3 months I had bitten my tongue so hard I could taste blood. And now, finally, someone was listening. "We'll need you to come down to the station," Price said. "Give a formal statement, and we'll need everything you have on your daughter-in-law. The original documents, any evidence of the affair, anything that might be relevant to your son's accident." "Death," I corrected him. "My son's death. I don't believe it was an accident, detective, and I think by the time we're finished you won't either." Price nodded slowly. "Let me make some calls. We may need to coordinate with the traffic investigation unit, see if there's any reason to reopen the case." While he stepped outside to use his phone, Detective Solis sat down across from me. "Mrs. Collins, I have to ask. You said you've been gathering evidence. How did you know to start looking?" I closed my eyes for a moment, remembering. 2 days after the funeral, Vanessa was in the kitchen making coffee, and I was in Marcus's home office, just sitting in his chair, trying to feel close to him. My voice caught, and this time the emotion was real. I opened his desk drawer looking for nothing in particular, and I found a receipt from a private investigator, dated 6 months before he died. "Your son hired a private investigator?" "For $8,000, paid in cash over 3 installments." I called the number on the receipt. The investigator told me Marcus had hired him to follow Vanessa. He had photographs of her with another man, hotel receipts, the works. I opened my eyes. My son knew his wife was cheating on him, detective. He'd known for months. And then he conveniently died in a car accident that made no sense. Solis wrote something in her notepad, her face unreadable. "Why didn't you tell anyone about this before?" "Because my husband died of a heart attack 4 years ago. Because Marcus was my only child. Because Vanessa had everyone convinced she was the perfect grieving widow, and I was just a bitter old woman who never liked her daughter-in-law." I smiled grimly. "Which is true, by the way. I never did like her. From the day Marcus brought her home, something felt wrong, but he loved her, so I kept my mouth shut." Detective Price came back inside, his expression thoughtful. "I spoke to the lead investigator on your son's accident. He said there were some irregularities that bothered him at the time, but nothing concrete enough to pursue." "What kind of irregularities?" "The fire damage was more extensive than they usually see, almost like an accelerant was used, but the forensics were inconclusive. And the brake lines were damaged, but they couldn't determine if that happened before or during the crash." My heart was pounding. The brake lines, like I said, inconclusive. "But given what you've told us, And given what we found at the airport, he paused. We're going to reopen the investigation, Mrs. Collins, and we're going to take a very close look at your daughter-in-law. 3 hours later, I sat in an interview room at the Phoenix Police Department, a cup of bitter coffee growing cold in front of me. I had told them everything. About the affair, about the private investigator, about Vanessa's increasingly suspicious behavior in the weeks after Marcus's death. I told them about the way she'd insisted on cremation, over my objections, claiming it was what Marcus would have wanted. About how quickly she'd sold his car, a replacement for the one that had burned, and how she'd started clearing out his belongings before the estate was even settled. I told them about the phone call I'd overheard 3 weeks after the funeral, when Vanessa didn't know I was in the house. It's taking longer than I thought, she'd said to someone on the other end, but I'll have the money soon. Just be patient. I told them about the life insurance policy and how Vanessa had been furious when she discovered I was listed as co-beneficiary. Marcus had taken out the policy before they were married, when I was his only family. He'd never changed it, and under Arizona law that meant Vanessa needed my signature to access the full payout. She was so sweet about it at first, I said. So understanding. I know this is hard, Deborah, but Marcus would have wanted us both to be taken care of. She had the papers all ready for me to sign. But you didn't sign them. I told her I wanted to wait until the estate was settled, that I needed time to grieve before dealing with finances. I laughed again, that same hollow sound. She didn't like that, started getting impatient, making comments about how the insurance company had deadlines, how we might lose the money if we waited too long. All lies, of course. Detective Price leaned forward. So, when did she forge your signature? About 6 weeks ago. The insurance company processed the claim and sent a check for the full amount, $485,000, to an account Vanessa had set up in both our names. Except I'd never authorized that account, and I'd never signed the documents that created it. But the bank caught the discrepancy. Not the bank. The insurance company. One of their fraud specialists noticed that my signature on the new account forms didn't match the signature on file from when Marcus first took out the policy. I smiled. She got greedy, Detective. She tried to transfer the entire amount instead of doing it slowly, and she got caught. There was a knock at the door. Another detective entered, older, heavier, with a rumpled suit and a face like a bulldog. Price, Solis. We've got a problem. What kind of problem? The new detective, his badge read Morrison, tossed a folder onto the table. Vanessa Collins is talking. She's got a lawyer, some hotshot from Scottsdale, and she's claiming the whole thing is a misunderstanding. Says Mrs. Collins here gave her verbal authorization to access the funds, and the signature was done by an assistant who misunderstood instructions. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's a lie. I figured, but she's also claiming you've been harassing her for months, making accusations about her involvement in your son's death, sending her threatening messages. I've never sent her any messages. I've barely spoken to her since the funeral. Morrison shrugged. She's got screenshots, text messages from your phone number, apparently pretty nasty stuff. I stared at him. I haven't, and then I understood. Vanessa wasn't just a thief. She wasn't just an adulteress. She had been planning this for a long time, and she had built a defense before she even committed the crime. She set me up, I said quietly. Those messages aren't from me. She must have spoofed my phone number, or I don't know how it works, but she's been building a case against me while I've been building a case against her. Price and Solis exchanged worried looks. We'll investigate the messages, Price said. Digital forensics can usually detect spoofing, but in the meantime, her lawyer is pushing for her release, claiming this is a civil matter, not criminal. Family dispute over inheritance. I stood up, knocking over my coffee cup. Cold brown liquid spread across the table, but I barely noticed. My son is dead. That woman killed him. I know she did. And now she's trying to steal everything he left behind and make me look like the crazy one. I'm not crazy. My voice was rising, and I couldn't stop it. I'm not a harassing mother-in-law. I'm not bitter or jealous or whatever story she's spinning. My son is dead and his wife is a murderer, and you have to believe me. The room went quiet. Detective Price stood slowly and put a hand on my arm. "We believe you're telling the truth as you know it, Mrs. Collins. But we need evidence, not suspicions. We need proof." I took a deep breath, then another. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to think clearly. "The private investigator," I said. "Marcus's private investigator. He has files, photographs, proof of the affair. We'll talk to him." And Marcus kept records. He was meticulous about everything. If he knew Vanessa was cheating, he probably documented every suspicious thing she did. Look in his cloud storage, his email, anywhere he might have backed up files. We'll need authorization to access those accounts. You'll have it, whatever you need. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the day was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. "Mrs. Collins," Detective Solis said gently, "why don't you go home and get some rest? We'll contact you tomorrow after we've had a chance to review everything." I nodded. There was nothing more I could do tonight. But as I gathered my purse and stood to leave, Detective Price stopped me. "One more thing. You mentioned Vanessa was having an affair. Do you know who the man was?" I paused at the door. The private investigator identified him. "His name is Tony Reeves. He owns an auto repair shop on the south side of the city." "An auto repair shop, yes?" I met the detective's eyes. "He's a mechanic, detective. And my son died when his brake lines failed. I left the station and drove home through streets that blurred with tears I was finally allowing myself to shed. Not tears of grief. Those had dried up weeks ago, replaced by something harder and colder. These were tears of rage. In my purse was a flash drive containing everything Marcus had saved. His private investigator's reports, screenshots of Vanessa's text messages with Tony Reeves, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, and one document I hadn't told the police about yet, a handwritten note from Marcus, dated 2 weeks before his death. "Mom, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I think Vanessa is planning something. I'm going to confront her tomorrow. If I don't call you by Sunday, look in my safe deposit box. I love you. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." I had found the note in his desk 3 days after the funeral. By then, Vanessa had already cleaned out the safe deposit box, claiming she needed documents for the insurance claim. But she hadn't found the flash drive taped to the bottom of Marcus's desk drawer. She hadn't found the key to his other safe deposit box, the one at a different bank, under a different name, that she didn't know existed. And she hadn't found the evidence that would prove she killed my son. Tomorrow, I would give it all to the police. Tonight, I would sit in my son's old room, surrounded by his childhood trophies and faded photographs, and I would make a promise to him. I would not rest until Vanessa paid for what she had done, even if it destroyed me in the process. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with the flash drive plugged into my laptop, going through every file Marcus had saved. The private investigator's name was Dennis Cole. He operated out of a strip mall office near Tempe and specialized in infidelity cases. According to his reports, he had followed Vanessa for 6 weeks, documenting everything. The affair with Tony Reeves had started at least 18 months before Marcus's death. They met twice a week at a budget motel on the outskirts of Mesa, the kind of place that charged by the hour and didn't ask questions. Cole had photographs of them entering and leaving, always in separate cars, always looking over their shoulders. But it was the later reports that made my stomach turn. 3 months before Marcus died, the meetings became more frequent. Cole had managed to get close enough to record a few conversations. Arizona being a one-party consent state, Marcus could use the recordings in a divorce proceeding. I put in my earbuds and pressed play. "We can't wait much longer," Vanessa's voice said, crackling with static. "He's starting to suspect something. So what do you want to do about it?" That was Tony Reeves. His voice was deeper, rougher. "I don't know. Maybe if something happened to him." "You mean like an accident?" A long pause. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." The recording ended there. Cole's notes indicated that Vanessa had spotted him, and the surveillance had to be terminated. Marcus never got more evidence, but this was enough to prove they had discussed my son's death before it happened. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely navigate to the next file. It was a series of text messages between Vanessa and Tony, recovered somehow from Marcus's phone. He must have figured out her passcode. The messages were damning. Miss you. When can we be together for real? That was Tony. Soon. Just need to handle some loose ends first. What kind of loose ends? The kind that pay out $500,000. I read that line 3 times, feeling sick. My son had seen these messages. He had known his wife was planning something. And he had stayed anyway, trying to gather enough evidence to protect himself. Instead, it had gotten him killed. The next morning, I called Detective Price and told him I had more evidence. He sent a car to pick me up within the hour. This time, I didn't hold anything back. I gave them the flash drive, the recordings, the text messages. I showed them Marcus's note and explained about the second safe deposit box. "Why didn't you tell us about this yesterday?" Price asked, his face grave. "Because I wanted to make sure you'd take it seriously. I needed you to see the forgery, the attempted flight, the pattern of behavior. Before I showed you this." I met his eyes. "Would you have believed me if I'd walked in with a flash drive and a conspiracy theory about my daughter-in-law murdering my son?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. "We need to bring Tony Reeves in for questioning," Detective Solis said. "And we need to get a warrant for his shop. If he sabotaged that car, there might be evidence." "It's been 3 months," I said. "He's had time to clean up. People always miss something. And if he's arrogant enough to stick around this long without running, he probably thinks he got away with it." She was right about that. I had driven past Reeves' auto body twice in the past month, just to see if it was still operating. Both times, Tony had been there, working under a car like he didn't have a care in the world. "What about Vanessa?" I asked. "She's still at county jail. Her lawyer is pushing for bail, but given the flight risk and the severity of the charges, the judge is hesitant." Price paused. "Although, with this new evidence, we might be looking at upgrading those charges significantly, from fraud to murder. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But yes, that's a possibility." I spent the rest of the morning in a conference room with Price, Solis, and 2 other detectives from what they called the cold case unit. They asked me questions about Marcus, his habits, his health, his relationship with Vanessa. They wanted to know everything. I told them about the night blindness, how Marcus had scheduled his life to avoid driving after dark. I told them about his meticulous record keeping, how he documented everything and saved backup copies of important files. I told them about the last conversation I'd had with him, 5 days before he died. "He seemed distracted," I said, "worried about something. I asked if everything was okay with Vanessa, and he said they were working through some issues. I should have pushed harder. You couldn't have known, but I should have." I stared at the wall, remembering my son's face. His eyes had always been so expressive, so easy to read. That last time I'd seen him, there had been something dark in them. Fear, maybe. Or resignation. Had he known what was coming? That afternoon, Detective Solis called to tell me they had brought Tony Reeves in for questioning. He had lawyered up immediately, a public defender, which suggested he didn't have the resources Vanessa did, and refused to answer any questions. But the warrant for his shop had turned up something interesting. "We found records," Solis said. "Service records for a 2019 Honda Accord, VIN matching your son's car. Work was done 4 days before the accident." "What kind of work?" "That's the thing. The record says it was a routine oil change and tire rotation, but we had our forensic mechanic look at the documentation, and he says the labor hours don't match. Someone spent way too long on that car for just an oil change. We can't prove that yet, but we're going to tear that shop apart looking for evidence. If Reeves kept any parts, any tools, any documentation." "He kept the car," I blurted out. "Marcus's car. After the accident, after the fire, Vanessa sold what was left to a salvage yard. But I remember seeing—" I closed my eyes, trying to picture it. "I drove past Reeves' auto body about 6 weeks ago. There was a burned-out frame in the back lot. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but—" "You think he bought the salvage?" "I think he wanted to make sure no one could examine it too closely. And the best way to do that is to control it himself." Solis was quiet for a moment. "I'll send a team to check. If that frame is Marcus's car, and we can prove Reeves bought it from the salvage yard, that's consciousness of guilt. That's a man trying to hide evidence. Find it, I said. Please. We're working on it, Mrs. Collins. I promise. I hung up and sat in the silence of my empty house. The clock on the wall ticked, marking seconds that felt like hours. 3 months of grief. 3 months of suspicion. 3 months of watching Vanessa play the tragic widow while my son rotted in the ground. And now, finally, the truth was starting to come out, but I knew it wasn't over. Vanessa was smart. Smarter than I'd given her credit for. She had built a defense, fabricated evidence of harassment, positioned herself as the victim. Even with everything we had, a good lawyer might be able to create reasonable doubt. I needed to find out everything about Tony Reeves. Where he came from, how he met Vanessa, whether this was his first time doing something like this. I pulled out my laptop and started searching. Tony Reeves was 41 years old, divorced, no children. He had opened Reeves Auto Body 8 years ago with a small business loan that had taken him 6 years to pay off. Before that, he'd worked at various garages around the Phoenix area, never staying anywhere more than a couple of years. His ex-wife lived in Tucson. I found her on social media, Linda Reeves, now Linda Hoffman, and scrolled through her public posts. She had remarried, had 2 kids, seemed happy in all the photos. I hesitated for only a moment before sending her a message. My name is Deborah Collins. I'm trying to find information about your ex-husband, Tony Reeves. I believe he may be involved in something serious. Would you be willing to speak with me? 20 minutes later, she responded. I've been waiting years for someone to ask me about Tony. When can we meet? We arranged to talk the next morning, Saturday, at a coffee shop in Tucson. I didn't tell the police. This was something I needed to do myself. The drive south took 2 hours. I spent most of it thinking about Marcus, about the baby I'd held in my arms 62 years ago, about the boy who'd brought me dandelions from the backyard, about the man who'd called me every Sunday without fail until he married Vanessa. The calls had become less frequent after that, monthly instead of weekly, and then, in the last year, hardly at all. I had blamed his busy schedule, his demanding job, the normal drifting apart of adult children from their parents. I should have known it was Vanessa. She had isolated him, just like she'd isolated herself from her own family. By the time Marcus died, he had almost no one left except her, and me. He still had me, though he didn't know how much I knew. Linda Hoffman was waiting at a corner table when I arrived at the coffee shop. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and eyes that had seen too much. Please, call me Deborah. I sat down across from her. Thank you for meeting me. I almost didn't. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, though it must have gone cold by now. My husband doesn't know I'm here. He thinks I'm at yoga. But when I got your message, I couldn't ignore it. Not after what Tony did to me. Linda looked around the coffee shop, making sure no one was close enough to overhear. When I married Tony, I thought he was everything I wanted. Handsome, charming, handy around the house. He fixed my car for free on our first date. She laughed bitterly. I should have seen it as the red flag it was. The first year was fine, great even. But then I got pregnant, and suddenly Tony changed. He didn't want a baby, said we couldn't afford it, said it would ruin our lives. When I refused to terminate, She stopped, her jaw tightening. Not directly. He's too smart for that. Linda met my eyes. The pregnancy was hard. Complications. I was on bed rest for the last 2 months. Tony was so supportive. Brought me food, made sure I took my medication, drove me to all my appointments. But I lost the baby anyway, at 32 weeks. The doctors said it was a cord accident, nothing anyone could have done. She wiped her eyes. It wasn't until years later, after the divorce, that I found out Tony had been crushing sleeping pills into my food, the same kind of pills that can cause complications in pregnancy. I felt ice spreading through my veins. Did you report him? To who? I had no proof, just a gut feeling and a dead baby. Linda's voice cracked. My doctor said sometimes these things just happen, but I knew. I knew Tony had done something. I just couldn't prove it. How did you finally leave him? I got smart. I started documenting everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every suspicious thing he did. I pretended everything was fine while I built my case. And then one day, I found his other phone. He had a burner. He used it to communicate with— Linda shook her head. He was running some kind of scam. Insurance fraud, I think. He'd tamper with cars, cause accidents, then collect when the owners filed claims. He had a whole network of people involved. I leaned forward. Do you still have evidence of this? Some. I kept copies when I left. My lawyer said it wasn't relevant to the divorce, but I couldn't make myself throw it away. She looked at me with something like desperation. Is this about the fraud? Did Tony finally get caught? It's about murder, I said. My son. I believe Tony helped my daughter-in-law kill him. Linda's face went white. He tampered with the brake lines, made it look like an accident. My son died in a car fire 3 months ago. I should have told someone years ago. If I had just— You couldn't have known. But you can help me now. I reached across the table and took her hand. Everything you have on Tony, every document, every photograph, every scrap of evidence, I need it all. I'll give you everything, and I'll testify if you need me to. Linda squeezed my hand back. That man destroyed my life. If I can help put him away, it might finally be worth something. We spent the next 2 hours going through Linda's files. She had emails, text messages, and financial records that painted a picture of a man who had made a career out of causing accidents and profiting from them. There were at least 4 other cases she knew about. Cars that had mysteriously malfunctioned, accidents that had resulted in insurance payouts. In 2 of those cases, people had been seriously injured. In one, a woman had died. The police investigated, Linda said, but Tony was careful. He never left direct evidence, always had alibis, always made sure the accidents looked random. Eventually, they dropped the cases. They won't drop this one. I drove back to Phoenix with a box full of documents in my passenger seat and a fire burning in my chest. Tony Reeves wasn't just a murderer. He was a serial criminal who had been getting away with it for years, and Vanessa had found him, or maybe he had found her. Either way, they had recognized something in each other, a willingness to do whatever it took to get what they wanted. My son had never stood a chance. When I got home, I called Detective Price and told him what I'd found. He was silent for a long moment after I finished. Mrs. Collins, I have to be honest with you. What you've done, interviewing potential witnesses, gathering evidence on your own, it's risky. A defense lawyer could argue you've contaminated the case. I was careful. Linda came to me voluntarily. I recorded nothing. Even so. He sighed. That said, if what you're telling me is true, this is exactly the kind of pattern evidence we need. It establishes that Reeves has done this before. So you'll look into it? We'll look into everything, but I need you to promise me something. No more amateur detective work. Let us handle it from here. The last thing we need is for Vanessa or Reeves to claim harassment or intimidation. I thought about the screenshots on Vanessa's phone, the fake text messages she'd fabricated. She was already building that narrative. I understand, I said. Good, we'll be in touch. I hung up and sat in the darkness of my living room, the box of evidence at my feet. Through the window, I could see the last light of sunset fading over the desert. My phone buzzed. A text message from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it, expecting spam. Instead, there was a photograph. It showed the front of my house, taken from across the street. The timestamp was from this morning, while I was in Tucson. Below the photograph was a single line of text. I know what you're doing. This isn't over. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. Someone was watching me. Someone who knew I had been investigating. Someone who wanted me to know they were watching. I thought about calling the police. But what would I tell them? That I'd received a threatening text? They would add it to the pile of evidence and tell me to be careful. Instead, I walked to the front door and made sure it was locked. Then I checked every window, every entrance, every possible way into my home. The message had been clear. The plan Vanessa and Tony had set in motion wasn't finished, and now I was in their sights. The threatening text message changed everything. I showed it to Detective Price the next morning, and within hours, there was a patrol car parked outside my house. The officer, a young woman named Chen, told me she would be there from 6 in the evening until 6 in the morning, when another unit would take over. We're taking this seriously, Mrs. Collins. Price said when he called. Whoever sent that message knew your movements. That suggests surveillance. Possibly. We're tracing the phone number, but I expect it's a burner. These people aren't stupid. No, they weren't. That was what scared me most. 2 days after the text, Detective Solis called with news that made my knees buckle. We found the car frame, she said, in the back lot of Reeves' auto body, just like you said. The VIN had been partially filed off, but our forensics team was able to recover enough to confirm it's your son's vehicle. And the brake lines? This is where it gets interesting. The fire damage was extensive, but our mechanic found tool marks on what was left of the brake assembly. Someone deliberately cut the lines, not all the way through, but enough that they would fail under sustained pressure. Like driving down a winding road. Exactly. The fluid would leak out slowly. The driver wouldn't notice until they tried to stop, and by then, it would be too late. I closed my eyes, picturing Marcus in those final moments. Had he known? Had he felt the brakes go soft? Had he pumped them desperately as the car careened toward the embankment? Or had it happened so fast he didn't even have time to be afraid? I hoped it was fast. I hoped he didn't suffer. There's more, Solis continued. We went through Tony Reeves's financial records. 6 days before your son's accident, he received a wire transfer of $15,000 from an account in the Cayman Islands. We can't prove that directly. The account is under a shell company name, but the timing is suspicious as hell. Solis paused. We've arrested Tony Reeves for murder. He's not going anywhere. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt hollow. What about Vanessa? Her lawyer is fighting the upgraded charges. The DA is going to proceed anyway, but it might take time. Weeks, maybe months. These things move slowly, Mrs. Collins. I hung up and stared at the wall. Weeks, months. While Vanessa sat in a jail cell plotting her next move, while her expensive lawyer looked for loopholes, while the justice system ground forward at its glacial pace. I couldn't wait that long. That night, I did something I'm not proud of. Something that could have destroyed the entire case. I went to see Vanessa. The county jail visitor center smelled like industrial cleaner and despair. I filled out the forms, showed my ID, and waited in a plastic chair until they called my name. Vanessa was already sitting behind the glass when I arrived. She looked different from the last time I'd seen her, thinner, paler, with dark circles under her eyes, but she smiled when she saw me. That same sweet, fake smile she'd been using since the day Marcus brought her home. Mother Collins. She picked up the phone on her side. What a surprise. I lifted my receiver. Don't call me that. You're right. That would imply we're family. Her smile turned cold. We both know you never thought of me that way. I thought of you as my son's wife. That was enough. Was it? She leaned forward, her eyes glittering. You never liked me, Deborah. From the very beginning. You thought I wasn't good enough for precious Marcus. I thought you were hiding something. I was right. Vanessa laughed. The sound made my skin crawl. You know what your problem is? You never could accept that your son was a grown man who made his own choices. He chose me. He loved me, and you couldn't stand it. He was going to divorce you. The smile flickered. Just for a moment, but I saw it. He told you about the private investigator, I continued. You knew he was watching you. That's why you had to move faster than you planned. I don't know what you're talking about. Tony Reeves has been arrested. They found Marcus's car at his shop. They know about the brake lines. Vanessa's expression didn't change, but I saw her hands tighten on the phone receiver. The man you've been sleeping with for 2 years. The man who helped you murder my son. I didn't murder anyone. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it now. Something close to panic. Marcus's death was an accident. A tragedy. I'm as devastated as you are. Then why were you fleeing the country with $500,000 that you stole by forging my signature? That was a misunderstanding. A clerical error. You're a liar. I pressed my palm flat against the glass. And a murderer. And I am going to make sure you spend the rest of your life in prison. Vanessa stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, her mask cracked. You want the truth? Fine. She glanced around, making sure no guards were close enough to hear. Marcus was pathetic. A mama's boy who couldn't make a decision without calling you first. I spent 5 years pretending to be the perfect wife while he bored me to death with his spreadsheets and his routines and his inability to take a single goddamn risk. He gave you everything. He gave me nothing. A house I didn't choose. A career I had to give up because he wanted someone to cook his dinners. A life sentence of mediocrity. Her lip curled. When I met Tony, I finally felt alive again. He understood me. He wanted things. He wasn't afraid to take what he deserved. So you killed Marcus to be with him. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, the cold smile returning. Here's what's going to happen, Deborah. My lawyer is very good. He's going to tear apart your circumstantial evidence and your hearsay testimony, and your desperate old woman theories. The brake lines? Damaged in the accident. The wire transfer? A business transaction that has nothing to do with me. The affair? Irrelevant to anything. You paid Tony Reeves to murder my son. I wanted to reach through the glass and wrap my hands around her throat. I wanted to scream until my voice gave out. I wanted to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she had caused me. Instead, I stood up. I will prove it. And when I do, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that you could have confessed, could have shown even a shred of remorse. And instead, you smiled at me like you'd gotten away with something. I hung up the phone and walked away. Behind me, I heard Vanessa laughing. Detective Price was not happy when he found out about my visit. Mrs. Collins, what were you thinking? Defense attorneys will use this. They'll say you were trying to intimidate a witness, tamper with evidence, bias the jury pool. I know. I'm sorry. You're sorry? He rubbed his face with both hands. Do you understand that you might have just given Vanessa's lawyer exactly what he needs to get the murder charges thrown out? I hadn't thought of that. I had been so consumed with rage, so desperate to confront her, that I hadn't considered the consequences. What can I do to fix it? Nothing. Just stay away from her. Stay away from the jail. Stay away from anyone connected to the case. Let us do our jobs. I promised I would, and this time I meant it. But Vanessa had given me something, even if she didn't intend to. She had confirmed the affair. She had all but admitted that Marcus's death wasn't an accident, and she had revealed something else. Something I hadn't known until she said it. She had given up her career to be Marcus's wife. That didn't match the woman I knew. Vanessa had never struck me as someone who would sacrifice anything for anyone. She was ambitious, driven, always looking for the next opportunity. So why had she really stopped working? I started digging into Vanessa's background, her employment history, her education, the years before she met Marcus. What I found made everything click into place. Vanessa had worked as a financial advisor at a brokerage firm in Scottsdale. She'd left the job 2 years before meeting Marcus, supposedly to pursue other opportunities. But when I looked closer, I found a disciplinary action from the Arizona Corporation Commission. Vanessa had been censured for unauthorized transactions and misrepresentation of client assets. In plain language, she had stolen from her clients. The firm had settled quietly to avoid scandal. Vanessa had agreed to leave the industry rather than face prosecution. She had walked away with a non-disclosure agreement and a clean record, on paper. But in reality, she had been blacklisted. No reputable firm would hire her. Her career in finance was over. That's when she had met Marcus. I remembered now. Marcus had mentioned meeting her at a charity event, a fundraiser for some local cause. He had been charmed by her wit, her beauty, her intelligence. He had no idea she was a predator looking for her next target, and I had failed to protect him. There was one more piece of the puzzle I needed, one more revelation that would tie everything together. I found it in Marcus's email. Detective Price had given me access to his cloud storage after confirming that I was the legal executor of his estate. I spent hours going through years of messages looking for anything relevant. 2 weeks before his death, Marcus had sent an email to his lawyer. The subject line was, "Emergency meeting, confidential." I opened it with trembling hands. "Roger, I need to see you as soon as possible. I've discovered something about Vanessa that changes everything. She's been lying about her past, and I have reason to believe she may be planning something dangerous. I'm attaching copies of documents I found hidden in her office. Please review them and advise me on next steps. I'm scared, Roger. I don't know who else to turn to. The attachment was a scanned file, pages from what looked like a journal. Vanessa's handwriting. I read the entries and felt my blood turn to ice. The old man died faster than I expected. $50,000 in life insurance and a house I can flip for triple that. Tony was right. This is easy money. The entry was dated 3 years before Vanessa met Marcus. There was another victim. Someone before my son. M suspect something. Need to accelerate the timeline. T says he can make it look like brake failure, same as the old man. Insurance payout plus the accounts I've already drained should be around $600K. Enough to disappear. M was Marcus. T was Tony. And the old man was someone else entirely. Someone who had died and been forgotten, just like my son was supposed to be. I called Detective Price with shaking hands. There's another victim, I said. Before Marcus, Vanessa killed someone else. An hour later, I was at the police station, showing them everything I'd found. If this is real... Solis looked at the journal entries. We're not just looking at one murder. We're looking at a pattern. A serial killer. She's not a serial killer in the traditional sense, Price said slowly. She's a black widow. She targets wealthy men, marries them, and arranges their deaths to collect insurance money. How do we find out who the first victim was? We dig into her history, marriage records, death certificates, insurance claims. If she did this before, there will be a trail. How long will that take? With what we have now? A few days. Price met my eyes. You did good, Mrs. Collins. This is exactly the kind of evidence we needed. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt sick. Another family out there, living with the same pain I was living with. Another mother, perhaps, who had buried her son without knowing the truth. Find them, I said. Find the other family. They deserve to know. 3 days later, they found him. Gerald Whitmore, age 67, had died in a single-car accident in New Mexico 4 years ago. He had been married to a woman named Vanessa Whitmore, maiden name Chambers, for 18 months before his death. His brake lines had failed on a mountain road. The investigation had ruled it an accident. Vanessa had collected $200,000 in life insurance and sold his house for $350,000. Then she had moved to Arizona, resumed using her maiden name, and started looking for her next target. Gerald Whitmore's daughter, a woman named Patricia, broke down crying when Detective Solis told her the news. I knew something was wrong, she said in a phone call I was allowed to listen to. I told the police Dad would never drive that road alone. He was scared of heights. But they didn't believe me. We believe you now, Solis said. Will she pay for what she did? We're going to do everything in our power to make sure she does. When the call ended, I sat in the conference room and cried. For Marcus, for Gerald Whitmore, for all the lives Vanessa had destroyed in her pursuit of money. But I cried for myself, too. For the mother I had been, and the mother I had failed to be. For all the warning signs I had missed, all the questions I should have asked. My phone buzzed. A text from the same unknown number as before. You think you've won? This is just the beginning. I showed it to Detective Price. His face went grim. We need to increase your protection. If Tony Reeves has associates, someone else sent that text. Someone who knows what you've been doing. He stood up. Stay here. I'm going to make some calls. I sat alone in the conference room, staring at the message on my phone. Vanessa had killed before. She would kill again if she got the chance. And somewhere out there, someone was watching me, waiting. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photograph. A shot of Vanessa in the jail visiting room, taken from outside the window. She was holding up a piece of paper. On it, written in black marker, were 3 words. Your move, Deborah. The photograph of Vanessa holding that sign changed everything. It meant she had someone on the outside. Someone who could visit her in jail, take photographs, send threatening messages. Someone who was still free to do her bidding. Detective Price launched an investigation into everyone who had visited Vanessa since her arrest. The list was short. Her lawyer, Gerald Knox, had visited 12 times. Her mother had visited twice, and a man named Daniel Reeves, Tony's younger brother, had visited once, 3 days ago. Daniel Reeves is a person of interest now, Price told me. We're bringing him in for questioning. Tony's brother, of course. We should have seen the connection sooner. Daniel works at a cell phone store. He has access to burner phones and the technical knowledge to spoof numbers. Price shook his head. He's been helping them this whole time. But bringing Daniel in didn't stop the threats. 2 days after his interview, during which he denied everything and demanded a lawyer, I found a dead rat on my doorstep. Its throat had been cut, and someone had written a word in red marker on the concrete beneath it. I called the police. They took photographs, collected the rat as evidence, and promised to increase patrols in my neighborhood. But we all knew it wasn't enough. You should consider staying somewhere else for a while, Detective Solis suggested. Do you have family you could visit? Friends out of state? I thought about it. My sister lived in California. A few old colleagues had retired to Florida. I could pack a bag and disappear, wait for the trial, let the police handle everything. But that would mean letting Vanessa win, letting her drive me from my home, my city, my son's grave. I had already lost Marcus. I wasn't going to lose anything else. I'm staying, I said. This is my home. I've lived here for 34 years. My husband died in this house. My son grew up in this house. I straightened my spine. I'm not running. Solis looked at me with something like respect. Then we'll do everything we can to keep you safe. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. Vanessa had allies. She had resources. She had a lawyer who was working around the clock to find loopholes and create reasonable doubt. But I had something too. I had the truth, and I was going to make sure everyone heard it. I called Linda Hayes, the attorney Detective Price had recommended weeks ago. She specialized in victims' rights and had a reputation for aggressive media relations. I want to go public, I told her. Everything I know about Vanessa, the affairs, the murders, the fraud, all of it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Collins, that's a risky strategy. It could prejudice the jury pool. Defense will argue you're trying the case in the press. Let them argue. Vanessa has been playing the victim since day one, crying for the cameras, giving interviews about her wrongful arrest. Meanwhile, her people are threatening me, killing animals on my doorstep, sending me photographs from inside the jail. I took a breath. I'm done being quiet. If we do this, we need to do it right. Controlled messaging, selected media outlets, a narrative that emphasizes your son's story, not just Vanessa's crimes. Then let's do it right. Linda came to my house that afternoon. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything, then spent an hour going through the evidence I'd compiled. This is solid, she finally said. The journal entries, the pattern with Gerald Whitmore, the financial trail, a jury will eat this up. But trials can be unpredictable. Juries are human. A good defense lawyer can make them doubt anything. She looked at me over her glasses. Our job is to make sure they don't doubt you. How do we do that? We make you sympathetic. Not difficult. You're a grieving mother whose son was murdered by his wife. But we need to be careful about how we present the information. Too aggressive and you look vindictive. Too passive. And Vanessa's people control the narrative. What do you recommend? 1 interview. Long-form, sympathetic journalist, prime time. Tell your story from beginning to end. Show the evidence. Let America see what kind of monster Vanessa Collins really is. And if Vanessa's lawyer tries to suppress it? First Amendment. She's been giving her own interviews. She can't claim prejudice when she started it. Linda smiled grimly. We're going to fight fire with fire. We spent the next 3 days preparing. Linda coached me on how to speak to the cameras. Calm, measured, emotional, but controlled. She helped me select photographs of Marcus, of our family, of the life Vanessa had destroyed. She drafted talking points and anticipated questions. They'll ask about your visit to the jail, she warned me. Vanessa's lawyer will try to paint you as the aggressor. I went to see her because I wanted the truth. That's exactly what you'll say. But remember, stay calm. Don't let them see anger. Anger makes you look unstable. Of course you are. But the camera doesn't understand context. It just sees a woman's face and makes judgments. Linda put a hand on my arm. You can be sad. You can be hurt. But save the anger for when the verdict comes in. The interview was set for the following Saturday, with a correspondent from a national news magazine. They would come to my house, film in Marcus's old room, let me tell my story in my own words. But 3 days before the interview, something happened that almost derailed everything. Tony Reeves's brother Daniel was found dead in his apartment. Apparent suicide. He had hanged himself from a ceiling fan, leaving a note that said only, "I can't do this anymore." The news hit me like a punch to the stomach. "Do you think he actually killed himself?" I asked Detective Price. "The scene is consistent with suicide. No signs of forced entry or struggle. But given everything that's happened," he trailed off. "You think Vanessa had him killed. I think it's suspicious timing. Daniel was the only connection between Vanessa and the threats against you. With him dead, that link is severed. Can you prove anything?" "Not yet. But we're looking into everyone Daniel had contact with in the days before his death. If Vanessa orchestrated this from jail, she would have needed help." The media went wild with the news. Daniel's death was the lead story on every local channel, with speculation ranging from guilt-driven suicide to organized crime connections. Vanessa's lawyer gave a statement expressing deep condolences and calling for privacy during this difficult time. Privacy. As if Vanessa hadn't been courting cameras since the moment she was arrested. "Does this change anything?" "It changes the story," she said. "It's bigger now, more complicated. There's a narrative forming. Black Widow, criminal conspiracies, suspicious deaths. That's exactly what we want. It doesn't feel like something we want. A man is dead. A man who was helping terrorize you. Who may have killed that rat and left it on your doorstep. Who was almost certainly involved in your son's murder." Linda's voice softened. "I know it's hard to separate the personal from the tactical, but Daniel Reeves wasn't innocent." She was right. But it still felt wrong to be calculating media angles while a man's body cooled in the morgue. The interview happened on schedule. The correspondent was a woman named Rachel Chen, no relation to the officer guarding my house, who specialized in true crime stories. She sat across from me in my living room, cameras capturing every detail, and asked me to tell her about Marcus. I talked for 3 hours, about his childhood, his career, his marriage, about the day the police came to tell me he was dead, about finding the evidence of Vanessa's betrayal, the affair, the fraud, the murder. I showed them the journal entries, the photographs Tony's ex-wife had provided, the timeline of deaths that followed Vanessa wherever she went. And I cried. Real tears, genuine grief, the kind of pain that can't be faked. When we finished, Rachel thanked me for my courage. "This is going to change things," she said. "When this airs, Vanessa Collins won't be able to hide anymore. That's all I want. The truth." The episode aired the following Thursday. I watched it alone in my living room, a glass of wine untouched beside me. The producers had done excellent work. They wove together interviews, photographs, court documents, and expert analysis into a devastating portrait of Vanessa as a cold, calculating predator. They included statements from Patricia Whitmore, Gerald's daughter, who had flown to Arizona to share her own story. 2 women, connected by tragedy. Both of us robbed of someone we loved by the same monster. By the time the credits rolled, my phone was exploding with messages. Friends I hadn't heard from in years. Colleagues from my teaching days. Distant relatives. All of them expressing shock, sympathy, support. But there was one message that mattered more than all the others. It was from Detective Price. The DA just called. Based on the new evidence and public pressure, they're upgrading the charges against Vanessa to 2 counts of first-degree murder. Arizona and New Mexico are coordinating prosecution. She's not getting out. I read the message 3 times, making sure I understood. 2 counts of murder. My son and Gerald Whitmore. Justice for both of them. I poured myself a fresh glass of wine and raised it to the empty room. "We got her, Marcus," I whispered. "We got her." But even as I said the words, I knew it wasn't over. Vanessa still had her lawyer, her resources, her willingness to destroy anyone who got in her way. The trial was coming, and Vanessa would fight until the very end. The morning after the interview aired, I found a letter in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Someone had delivered it by hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 typed sentences. "You think you're safe because they're locked up. You're wrong." I called the police. They added the letter to the evidence file, dusted it for fingerprints, promised to investigate. But I knew they wouldn't find anything. Whoever was helping Vanessa knew how to cover their tracks. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. Someone was still out there. Someone who wanted me afraid. But fear was a luxury I couldn't afford. The preliminary hearing was in 2 weeks. I would have to testify, face Vanessa across a courtroom, tell my story to a judge who would decide whether there was enough evidence for trial. I had come too far to back down now. I closed my eyes and thought of Marcus, of his smile, his laugh, the way he used to call me every Sunday just to check in. "I won't let her win," I promised him, "whatever it takes." The preliminary hearing took place on a Tuesday morning in late November. I arrived at the courthouse an hour early, dressed in a black suit I'd bought specifically for this occasion. Linda Hayes met me at the door and walked me through what to expect. "The defense will try to rattle you," she warned. "They'll imply you're unstable, that you've been harassing their client, that your evidence is fabricated or misinterpreted. Stay calm. Answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information. And when you see Vanessa, don't react. Don't give her the satisfaction." I had practiced this. I had spent hours in front of a mirror, rehearsing my neutral expression, my measured responses. I knew what was coming, and I was ready. When Vanessa walked into the courtroom, I felt my carefully constructed composure crack. She looked nothing like the woman I'd visited in jail. Her hair was styled, her makeup perfect. She wore a cream-colored dress that made her look soft and vulnerable, the tragic young widow wrongly accused. She leaned on her lawyer's arm as if too weak to walk on her own, silent tears streaming down her cheeks, wiped away with a delicate tissue. Every eye in the courtroom was on her, and she knew it. I gripped the edge of my seat and forced myself to breathe. The judge, a severe-looking woman named Patricia Holloway, called the hearing to order. The prosecution went first, laying out their case with methodical precision. The evidence of fraud, the affair with Tony Reeves, the break lines, the journal entries, the pattern with Gerald Whitmore. Vanessa's lawyer, Gerald Knox, objected frequently. Hearsay, speculation, irrelevant. Judge Holloway overruled most of his objections, but a few stuck. The defense was building a foundation for appeal before the trial had even started. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the witness stand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. The prosecutor, a young woman named Sarah Chen, guided me through my story, the discovery of the fraud, the investigation into Marcus's death, the evidence I had gathered. I answered every question clearly and calmly. I showed no anger, no bitterness, just the facts. Then it was Knox's turn. He stood slowly, buttoning his expensive suit jacket, and approached the stand with a sympathetic smile. "Mrs. Collins, first, let me express my condolences for your loss. Losing a child is the worst pain any parent can endure. You've been through a great deal these past few months. The grief, the shock of discovering potential fraud. It's understandable that you might look for someone to blame. I'm not looking for someone to blame. I found someone who is guilty. Of course. But you'd agree that grief can affect our judgment? That it might lead us to see patterns that aren't really there?" I felt my jaw tighten. I spent 35 years as a high school teacher. I've been evaluating evidence and drawing conclusions my entire adult life. Teaching and criminal investigation are very different fields. They both require critical thinking and attention to detail. Knox smiled, as if I'd just proven his point. "Let's talk about your visit to my client in jail. You went to see her without informing the police. Why?" "I wanted to hear the truth from her directly." "Or perhaps you wanted to intimidate her, to threaten her." I did nothing of the kind. Yet you told her, and I quote, "I am going to make sure you spend the rest of your life in prison." That sounds like a threat to me. It was a statement of intent, not a threat. A statement of intent to see my client punished, regardless of her guilt or innocence? She's guilty. The evidence proves it. Knox turned to the judge. Your Honor, this witness has demonstrated a clear bias against my client. Her investigation was conducted outside proper channels. Her evidence was gathered without legal authority, and her public statements have been designed to prejudice any potential jury. We've heard this argument before, Mr. Knox, Judge Holloway said dryly. Move on. Knox nodded, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was planting seeds of doubt. Mrs. Collins, let's discuss the so-called journal entries you claim to have found in your son's email. Can you verify their authenticity? My son had them. He was gathering evidence. That's not what I asked. Can you personally verify that these journal entries are genuine? That they weren't fabricated by someone with access to your son's accounts? I hesitated. The handwriting matches Vanessa's. Handwriting can be forged. You, of all people, should know that. The forensic analysis confirmed. The forensic analysis was inconclusive, Mrs. Collins. The expert testified that the entries appeared consistent with my client's handwriting, not that they were definitively hers. Knox leaned closer. Is it possible that someone else wrote those entries to frame my client? That's absurd. Is it? You have a history of animosity toward my client. You've admitted you never liked her. You've conducted a public campaign to destroy her reputation. Is it so far-fetched that you might have planted evidence to support your theories? I didn't plant anything. That's outrageous. Then why was it you who discovered every piece of evidence in this case? The journal entries, the private investigator's files, the connection to Tony Reeves. You want us to believe that a retired school teacher managed to uncover what professional law enforcement missed. I looked at Knox, at his smug expression, and felt something shift inside me. I uncovered what law enforcement missed because I was looking, I said, because no one else cared enough to dig. Your client fooled everyone with her tears and her perfect act, but she didn't fool me. I knew something was wrong from the beginning. I just needed time to prove it. Or time to construct a story that fit your narrative. The evidence speaks for itself, Mr. Knox. The break lines. The wire transfer. The body of her first husband. Your client is a murderer. You can spin it however you want, but the truth doesn't change. Knox smiled again, that infuriating, condescending smile. No further questions. I stepped down from the stand with my heart pounding. I had lost my temper. I had given Knox exactly what he wanted, an emotional outburst that he could use to paint me as unstable. But when I looked at the judge's face, I didn't see skepticism. I saw something else. The hearing continued for 2 more days. Tony Reeves testified under a plea agreement, admitting that he had sabotaged Marcus's brake lines at Vanessa's request. In exchange for his testimony, the prosecution had agreed to recommend a sentence of 25 years instead of life. It was less than he deserved, but it was enough to confirm everything I had suspected. Linda Hoffman, Tony's ex-wife, testified about the pattern of accidents that had followed Tony throughout his career. The prosecution introduced evidence from 3 other cases where Tony had been suspected but never charged. And Patricia Whitmore testified about her father, about the brake failure on a mountain road, about the insurance payout that had funded Vanessa's new life. By the time the hearing ended, the evidence was overwhelming. Judge Holloway didn't hesitate. Based on the testimony and evidence presented, I find sufficient probable cause to bind the defendant over for trial on 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of insurance fraud, 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder, and 1 count of forgery. She looked at Vanessa. Collins, you will be held without bail pending trial. Court is adjourned. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. As the bailiff moved to escort her back to custody, she turned and looked directly at me. This isn't over, she hissed. You think you've won, but you haven't. I will destroy you. I met her eyes without flinching. You already tried. It didn't work. The bailiff pulled her away. I watched until she disappeared through the doors, then turned to find Detective Price standing beside me. Congratulations, Mrs. Collins. You did it. We did it. I corrected him. I couldn't have done any of this without you. I'm not sure that's true. You were already building a case before you ever talked to us. He smiled slightly. You would have made a hell of a detective. I was a teacher. Same skill set, different application. We walked out of the courthouse together into a gray November afternoon. Camera crews were gathered on the steps, shouting questions. Linda Hayes stepped in front of me, handling the press with practiced ease. Mrs. Collins has no comment at this time. The evidence speaks for itself. We look forward to seeing justice served at trial. I let Linda shepherd me to her car, away from the crowds and the questions. Inside, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The trial will be in 3 to 4 months, Linda said. The prosecution is confident, but Knox is good. He'll use every trick in the book. Are you ready for that? It's going to be intense. National media coverage. Every detail of your life, and Marcus's, examined under a microscope. I thought about it. About the scrutiny, the pressure, the invasion of privacy. I'm ready, I said, whatever it takes. That night, I sat alone in my house and thought about everything that had happened. The months of investigation, the threats, the dead rat on my doorstep. The photograph of Vanessa with her taunting message. She had tried to break me. She had failed, but something was still bothering me. Something about the timing, about the loose ends. Daniel Reeves's suicide, the anonymous letters, the feeling I couldn't shake that there was someone else out there, someone I hadn't identified yet. I pulled out my laptop and started going through the evidence again, the emails, the financial records, the timeline of events, and then I found it. A name I had overlooked, a transaction I had dismissed as irrelevant. 2 weeks before Marcus's death, Vanessa had made a $5,000 payment to someone named R. Chen. At the time, I had assumed it was an unrelated expense. But now, looking closer, I saw that the payment had been marked Consulting Special Project. The officer assigned to guard my house was named Chen. The journalist who had interviewed me was named Rachel Chen. It could be a coincidence. Chen was a common name. But I didn't believe in coincidences anymore. I called Detective Price. I need to see the full list of Vanessa's financial transactions, I said. All of them. Every payment she made in the year before Marcus died. Mrs. Collins, it's almost midnight. Please. I think I found something. He sighed. I'll see what I can do. I hung up and sat in the darkness, my mind racing. Who was R. Chen? And what special project had Vanessa paid them for? The answers would have to wait until morning. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that there was still more to uncover. Vanessa had planned Marcus's murder carefully, methodically, and I was going to find out exactly how deep the conspiracy went. The R. Chen mystery turned out to be a dead end. Detective Price traced the payment to a legitimate marketing consultant named Roger Chen, who had helped Vanessa set up a fake business as part of her divorce planning. He had no knowledge of the murder plot and no connection to anyone else in the case. Sometimes a coincidence is just a coincidence, but the investigation did uncover something else. The source of the anonymous letters and photographs. It wasn't Daniel Reeves, as we had assumed. It was Vanessa's mother. Eleanor Chambers, 71 years old, had been helping her daughter from the beginning. She had delivered the threatening notes. She had taken the photograph in the jail visiting room. She had been Vanessa's eyes and ears on the outside. When the police arrested her, she broke down immediately. I didn't know about the murders, she sobbed in the interrogation room. Vanessa told me the Collins family was persecuting her. She said they were trying to steal her husband's money. I was just trying to protect my daughter. I watched the recording through a two-way mirror, feeling something close to pity. Eleanor had been manipulated just like everyone else in Vanessa's orbit. She had believed her daughter's lies because the alternative was too terrible to accept. But pity didn't equal forgiveness. She threatened me, I told Detective Price afterward. She terrorized me for months. I want her prosecuted. The DA is charging her with criminal harassment and intimidation. She'll probably get probation, given her age and the circumstances. It's better than nothing, and her testimony against Vanessa will be valuable. She can confirm that Vanessa was coordinating everything from jail, pulling strings like a puppeteer. I suppose that was something. The trial began in early March, 4 months after Marcus's death. The courthouse was packed with reporters, spectators, and camera crews from every major network. This was the biggest case Phoenix had seen in years, a beautiful young widow accused of murdering 2 husbands for insurance money. The prosecution built their case methodically. They called Tony Reeves, who testified in excruciating detail about how he had sabotaged Marcus's brake lines. They called the forensic experts who had analyzed the car wreckage. They called the financial investigators who had traced the money. They called Patricia Whitmore, who broke down crying as she described her father's death. I testified for 2 days. I told the story from beginning to end, the discovery of the fraud, the investigation, the threats. I showed the jury Marcus's note, the one he had written 2 weeks before his death. "Mom, if you're reading this, something has happened to me." By the time I finished reading it aloud, half the jury was in tears. Vanessa's defense was predictable. Knox argued that Tony Reeves was the real mastermind, that Vanessa had been manipulated by her lover into a scheme she didn't understand. He painted her as a naive young woman who had fallen for the wrong man, but the journal entries destroyed that narrative. Vanessa's own words, in her own handwriting, describing her plans to kill the old man and M. When the handwriting expert confirmed the entries were authentic, I saw something flicker in Knox's eyes. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Marcus Collins, how do you find? We find the defendant guilty. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Gerald Whitmore, how do you find? We find the defendant guilty. Vanessa didn't react. She sat perfectly still, her face a blank mask, as the foreman read count after count. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 7 counts in total, 2 murders, insurance fraud, conspiracy, forgery. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In Arizona, first-degree murder carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison or death. The prosecution was seeking life without parole. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt empty. Marcus was still dead. No verdict could change that. No sentence could bring him back. The night before sentencing, I went to the cemetery. I hadn't been there since the funeral. I couldn't bear it. But now, with the trial over, I needed to see him. His grave was neat and well-maintained. Someone had been tending it, probably the cemetery staff. But I like to think Marcus had friends who visited, people who remembered him. I sat on the grass beside the headstone and talked to him. "We got her," I said. "Vanessa. She's going to prison for the rest of her life. She'll never hurt anyone again." The wind rustled through the trees. In the distance, a car passed on the road. "I wish you could have told me what was happening. I wish you had trusted me enough to ask for help." I wiped my eyes. "But I understand why you didn't. You were always so independent, so determined to handle things on your own." I touched the cold marble of his headstone. "I miss you every day, every single day. The world is quieter without you in it." I took a deep breath. "But I'm going to be okay. I'm going to figure out how to live without you, and I'm going to make sure your memory isn't just about how you died. It's going to be about how you lived." I sat there for an hour, watching the sun set over the desert. Then I stood, brushed the grass from my clothes, and walked back to my car. Tomorrow, I would watch Vanessa be sentenced, and then I would start the rest of my life. The sentencing hearing was brief. The judge, the same Patricia Holloway who had presided over the preliminary hearing, gave Vanessa the opportunity to speak. Vanessa stood slowly, her orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the cream-colored dress she had worn at her first appearance. "I have nothing to say." That was it. No apology, no explanation, no remorse. Judge Holloway nodded. "Vanessa Collins, you have been convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, along with multiple related charges. Your crimes were calculated, cold-blooded, and utterly without conscience. You targeted vulnerable men, gained their trust, and then murdered them for financial gain." She paused, looking directly at Vanessa. "The state of Arizona has determined that you are not eligible for the death penalty due to procedural issues with the charging documents. However, it is within my power to ensure that you never have the opportunity to harm another person." On count 1, first-degree murder of Marcus Collins, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On count 2, first-degree murder of Gerald Whitmore, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole, to be served consecutively. On the remaining counts, I sentence you to an additional 25 years, also consecutive. Judge Holloway closed her folder. Collins, you will spend the rest of your natural life in prison. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none to give. The bailiff led Vanessa away. She walked with her head high, showing no emotion. I watched her go, feeling nothing but exhaustion. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee. The house felt different now. Lighter, somehow. I had repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, donated most of Marcus's things to charity, not because I wanted to forget him, but because holding on to objects wasn't the same as holding on to love. Detective Price had retired the month after the trial. We had lunch sometimes, not romantic, just two people who had been through something together. He was writing a book about the case. I had given him permission to use my story. Linda Hoffman had reached out from Tucson. We had become friends of a sort, two women connected by the same monster. She had started a support group for victims of domestic violence, and I had been invited to speak. Patricia Whitmore and I exchanged emails regularly. She was finally at peace, knowing her father's killer was behind bars. I was learning to live again. I had started volunteering at a local shelter for abuse survivors. I taught them practical skills, budgeting, job searching, navigating the legal system, the same skills I had used to take down Vanessa. Some days were harder than others. Some days I woke up and forgot, just for a moment, that Marcus was gone. Those were the worst days. But most days, I found moments of something approaching peace. The phone rang as I finished my coffee. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Mrs. Collins? This is Sarah Chen from the District Attorney's Office. I wanted to let you know, we've received information that Vanessa Collins has been providing testimony against other inmates in exchange for privileges. She's been involved in some kind of scheme inside the prison. We're investigating. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Of course she has. That woman will never stop. No, probably not, but she's not your problem anymore. I just thought you should know. Thank you for calling. I hung up and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the desert garden I had planted last month. Succulents and wildflowers, adapted to survive in harsh conditions. Vanessa was still playing games, still manipulating, still trying to win. But she was doing it from a prison cell where she would spend the rest of her life. And I was here, in the sunlight, alive and free. I thought about Marcus. About his smile, his laugh, the way he used to bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. I thought about Robert, my husband, who had died 4 years before, about the life we had built together, the son we had raised. I thought about all the women like me, mothers who had lost children, wives who had lost husbands, survivors who had found the strength to fight back. I picked up the phone and called the shelter. Hi, this is Deborah Collins. I know I'm not scheduled until Thursday, but I was wondering if you needed any help today. I grabbed my keys, locked the door, and stepped out into the Arizona sunshine. The world kept turning, life kept moving, and I had learned something important in the months since Marcus's death. Justice doesn't heal the wound. It doesn't bring back the dead or erase the pain, but it creates space to grieve, to remember, to eventually move forward. I had gotten justice for my son, for Gerald Whitmore, for all the people Vanessa had hurt. Now it was time to find something else. It was time to find hope.